Hi everyone, welcome back. We're glad to have you with us today. We got a new story to tell, so let's start. When I first met Lily, she was like a bolt of lightning, brilliant, unpredictable, and impossible to ignore. It was a chance meeting at a coffee shop when I spilled my drink, and she laughed, not at me, but with me, as though the whole thing was an inside joke we both understood. That laugh, that moment, was the beginning of everything. She was the kind of person who made you feel like the center of the universe. And for a while, I believed I was. Fast forward 6 years, and here I was, sitting at the dinner table, watching her scroll through her phone as if I wasn't even there. Her expression was distant, a faint smile tugging at her lips every time a notification lit up the screen. It had become her ritual, this nightly fixation with her phone, and it had turned into my silent torment. "Busy night?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. She glanced up, startled, as though she'd forgotten I was in the room. Oh, just checking messages. Trisha's planning something for the weekend." Trisha, of course. That woman had been a constant presence in Lily's life lately, an echo chamber for all her frustrations and desires. I'd never liked her much, but Lily seemed to hang on her every word. I nodded and pushed my plate aside, no longer hungry. "Sounds fun." Lily muttered something non-committal and went back to her phone. The silence between us was deafening, broken only by the occasional clink of silverware or the faint buzz of her notifications. It hadn't always been like this. There was a time when we couldn't stop talking to each other, when even the smallest moments felt meaningful. But lately, it felt like I was holding on to something that was slipping through my fingers. That night, after Lily had gone to bed, I stayed up staring at the ceiling. My mind raced with questions I couldn't bring myself to ask. Was it me? Had I changed? Or was it something? Or someone else? The next morning, I woke up early, hoping to catch Lily before her day began. She was in the kitchen, sipping her coffee and scrolling through her phone again. She looked up when I walked in, but the smile she gave me felt more like a reflex than genuine warmth. "Morning," I said, grabbing a mug for myself. "Morning," she replied, her voice light but distant. I hesitated, unsure of how to start the conversation that had been weighing on me. "You've been spending a lot of time with Trisha lately," I said finally. She looked up surprised. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," I said quickly, holding up a hand. "Just an observation." Lily's expression softened, but only slightly. "She's been going through a lot. I'm just trying to be there for her." I nodded, though I wasn't sure I believed her. Something about the way she avoided my eyes, the way she clutched her phone like a lifeline, told me there was more to the story. The weekend came faster than I expected. Lily had plans with Trisha, again, and I found myself alone in the house, nursing a cold beer and flipping through old photo albums. The pictures told a story of a couple who couldn't get enough of each other, of spontaneous road trips, lazy afternoons, and late-night conversations that stretched until dawn. I wonder where that couple had gone. Around midnight, I heard the familiar hum of Lily's car pulling into the driveway. I stayed in the living room, listening as she came in, her heels clicking against the tile floor. She paused in the entryway, as if checking to see if I was awake, then headed upstairs without a word. I stared at the empty doorway, a hollow feeling settling in my chest. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday night. I was sitting at the kitchen table, sorting through some papers for work, when Lily walked in, her hair damp and her expression unusually tense. "We need to talk," she said, her voice clipped. My stomach twisted. Nothing good ever came from those words. "Okay," I said, setting down my pen. She sat across from me, folding her hands on the table. "I feel stuck, Ethan, like I'm suffocating." I blinked, stunned. "What are you talking about?" "Our marriage," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "I don't feel like myself anymore. I don't know who I am when I'm with you." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Lily, if something's wrong, we can work on it. We've been through rough patches before." She shook her head, looking down at her hands. "It's not that simple." "Why not?" I asked, my voice rising despite myself. "What happened to us, Lily? What happened to the life we built together?" She didn't answer, and the silence between us felt like a chasm. "I need space," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I stared at her, struggling to process what she was saying. Space? What does that even mean? It means I need to figure out who I am, she said, standing up and grabbing her phone. I can't do that here. I watched as she walked out of the room, leaving me alone with 100 unanswered questions and a heart that felt like it was breaking in two. As I sat there, staring at the empty seat across from me, one thought kept running through my mind. I couldn't lose her, but I didn't know how to hold on. This was the moment that would change everything, though I didn't know it yet. This was the beginning of the end, or maybe the start of something new. Either way, nothing would ever be the same. The following weekend, Lily suggested we take a short trip to clear the air. She booked a cabin in a small lakeside town about 2 hours away. Part of me wanted to refuse. What good was running from our problems when they would follow us wherever we went? But I said yes because I wasn't ready to give up. The drive was quiet. Lily stared out the window, the reflection of her phone's screen flickering against her face. I tried to start a conversation about the scenery, the weather, anything, but her responses were short, almost mechanical. When we arrived, the cabin looked perfect, at least on the surface. Nestled among tall pine trees, with a view of the lake shimmering in the distance. It seemed like the kind of place where people might come to fall in love all over again. But love isn't something you can force. That evening, after unpacking, we decided to take a walk along the lake. The air was crisp, the kind of clean that fills your lungs and clears your head. We walked side by side, the gravel crunching beneath our shoes, but the silence between us was deafening. Do you remember our honeymoon? I asked suddenly, desperate to fill the void. Lily hesitated, then nodded. Of course I do. You said you wanted to spend every anniversary somewhere new, somewhere adventurous. I chuckled softly, more to myself than to her. Life had other plans, huh? She didn't respond, just stared out at the water, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Lily, I said, stopping in my tracks. Are you even trying anymore? She turned to face me, her eyes wide with surprise. What's that supposed to mean? It means I feel like I'm the only one fighting for us, I said, my voice trembling. Every time I try to talk to you, it's like you're somewhere else. I can't fix this by myself. Her expression softened, but only for a moment. Then she looked away, biting her lip. I'm trying. I just don't know if it's enough. The words cut deeper than I thought they would. The next day, Lily insisted on visiting the resort spa while I rented a canoe and paddled out onto the lake. I needed the space too, though I hated admitting it. The water was calm, a mirror reflecting the endless blue of the sky. As I drifted, my thoughts churned. I kept replaying our conversation from the night before, searching for something I might have said differently, something that could have changed the outcome. But no matter how many scenarios I ran through in my head, they all ended the same way, with Lily pulling further away. I didn't know how long I'd been out there when I saw her on the dock, talking to someone. He was tall, with a confident stance and an easy smile. Even from a distance, I could see how Lily's body language shifted, how she leaned in just a little too closely, how her laughter carried across the water like a song I didn't want to hear. My grip on the paddle tightened. When I got back to the cabin later that evening, Lily was already inside, sitting on the couch with her phone in hand. Who was the guy at the dock? I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. She looked up startled. What guy? The one you were talking to, I said, setting my keys on the counter. Tall, dark hair, seemed friendly. Oh, she said quickly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. That was Marcus. He's staying in one of the other cabins. We just ran into each other. Her voice was light, but there was an edge to it, a defensiveness that set my nerves on edge. Ran into each other? I repeated, folding my arms. Yes, Ethan, she snapped, standing up. We had a conversation. That's all. Am I not allowed to talk to people anymore? Her reaction caught me off guard, but I didn't back down. I'm just asking. You don't have to get so defensive. She rolled her eyes and grabbed her jacket. I'm going for a walk. Don't wait up. I watched her go, the door slamming behind her, and the tension in my chest tightened like a vice. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening for the sound of the door opening. When Lily finally came back, it was well past midnight. She moved quietly, but I could still hear her in the bathroom, brushing her teeth, the faint hum of a tune under her breath. When she slipped into bed, I turned to face her. "Lily, we need to talk." She sighed, pulling the blanket up to her chin. "Not now, Ethan. I'm tired." "I'm tired too," I said softly, my voice breaking. "Tired of feeling like I don't know you anymore." She didn't respond. She just turned away, leaving me alone in the dark with nothing but my thoughts. The trip ended the next day, but the distance between us had only grown. As I drove us back home, Lily stared out the window again, her reflection flickering in the glass. I wanted to say something, to break the silence, but the words wouldn't come. Maybe because, deep down, I already knew the truth. We were losing each other, and I didn't know how to stop it. It was a week after the trip when the cracks in our marriage split wide open. Lily had been acting strange ever since we got back, more withdrawn, more guarded. She'd spend hours on her phone or disappear for long walks, claiming she needed to clear her head. At first, I tried to give her space, thinking maybe it was just a phase, but the nagging feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. Then came the night, everything unraveled. I was sitting in my office, going through some old case files, when I noticed Lily's phone vibrating on the coffee table in the living room. She had left it there when she went out to run errands. Normally, I wouldn't have given it a second thought, but the name on the screen stopped me cold. "Marcus." I froze, staring at the glowing screen as it buzzed again and again. A part of me didn't want to look, didn't want to cross that line. But another part of me, the part that couldn't take another sleepless night wondering what was happening to us, picked up the phone. The screen unlocked with a simple swipe, and there it was, a string of messages that confirmed everything I'd been afraid of. "Marcus, can't stop thinking about last night." "Marcus, you looked amazing. Wish I could have stayed longer." "Marcus, same time tomorrow?" My heart pounded in my chest as I scrolled further. The messages weren't explicit, but the meaning behind them was clear. I slammed the phone down, my hands trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the wall, trying to make sense of it all. How had we gotten to this point? How had I not seen it sooner? When Lily walked through the door later that night, I was still in the living room, her phone sitting on the table in front of me like a loaded gun. She froze when she saw me, her eyes darting to the phone and then back to my face. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice careful. "Who's Marcus?" I asked, holding her gaze. Her face went pale, and for a moment, she didn't say anything. Then she tried to laugh it off. "Ethan, don't be ridiculous. He's just a friend." "Just a friend?" I repeated, my voice sharper than I intended. "Because these messages don't sound like something you'd send to a friend." I picked up the phone and read one of the texts aloud, my voice shaking. "Can't stop thinking about last night. Wish I could have stayed longer." Care to explain that? Lily's expression crumbled, and she sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. "Ethan, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to happen." The words hit me like a physical blow. "You didn't mean for what to happen, Lily? Be specific." She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "It was a mistake. I didn't plan it. I felt so lost, so disconnected. And Marcus, he made me feel—" "Don't." I cut her off, my voice cold. "Don't you dare say he made you feel alive or understood or whatever excuse you're about to throw at me." "I'm sorry," she whispered again, but the words felt hollow, meaningless. I stood there, staring at the woman I thought I knew, and all I could feel was anger. Anger at her, at Marcus, at myself for not seeing it sooner. The rest of the night passed in a blur. I packed a bag and left the house, ignoring Lily's pleas for me to stay. I couldn't be there, not after what I'd just learned. I drove aimlessly for hours, replaying every moment of our marriage in my head, trying to figure out where it all went wrong. Had I missed the signs? Had I failed her in some way? Or was this just who she'd become? Eventually, I found myself parked outside Jamie's house. He opened the door in his pajamas, his face a mix of confusion and concern. "Ethan, what the hell are you doing here?" I didn't answer. I just stepped inside and sat on his couch, my head in my hands. "She cheated, Jamie," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Jamie sat down beside me, his expression hardening. "What do you mean, Lily?" I nodded. And for the first time that night, the tears came. The next morning, I called Henry, my old mentor. I needed advice, clarity, anything to help me make sense of the mess my life had become. "Ethan," he said, his voice calm and steady as always. "I know this feels like the end of the world, but it's not. You've been through hell before, and you've come out stronger. This is no different." "It feels different," I muttered, staring out the window of Jamie's living room. "Then make it different," he said. "Use this as a turning point. Focus on yourself for once. Rebuild. Not for her, but for you." His words stuck with me. By the time I returned home that evening, Lily was gone. She'd left a note on the kitchen counter, apologizing again and saying she needed time to think. I stared at the note for a long time before crumpling it up and tossing it in the trash. I didn't need her apologies. What I needed was to figure out how to pick up the pieces of my life and move forward without her. The house felt impossibly quiet after Lily left. The kind of silence that presses against your chest and makes it hard to breathe. I sat in the living room for hours, staring at the empty space where her shoes used to sit by the door. Part of me expected to hear her key in the lock, to hear her voice call out, "Ethan, I'm home." But deep down, I knew she wasn't coming back. Not tonight, maybe not ever. For the first time in years, I was completely alone. The next few days passed in a haze. I went through the motions. Woke up, went to work, came home. But everything felt off, like I was moving underwater. Jamie checked in on me a couple of times, even dragged me out for a drink one night. But the usual banter we shared couldn't cut through the weight in my chest. "You can't just let this eat you alive, man," Jamie said, nursing his beer. "She screwed up, not you. You got to focus on yourself now." I nodded, though I wasn't sure I believed him. The real turning point came when I got a call from Henry. He'd heard about what happened, thanks to Jamie, and insisted on meeting me at his favorite diner. When I walked in, Henry was already seated, a cup of coffee in front of him. He waved me over with a grin, the kind of grin that said he'd seen far worse and survived it. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the booth across from him. I slid into the seat, and before I could even order, he leaned forward, his expression serious. "Ethan, listen to me. This thing with Lily? It's not the end of you." I opened my mouth to respond, but he held up a hand. "No, hear me out. You've been through tougher battles than this. You've rebuilt your life before, and you can do it again. But first, you need to let go of the idea that you can fix her or this marriage. She made her choice. Now it's time for you to make yours." I stared at him, his words sinking in slowly. "What choice do I have?" I said finally. Henry leaned back, his gaze steady. "You have every choice, Ethan. You can wallow in this, let it destroy you. Or you can use it to rebuild yourself, better, stronger. The question is, which path are you going to take?" That night, I sat in the darkened kitchen, staring at a blank sheet of paper. Henry's words echoed in my mind, and for the first time in days, I felt a spark of clarity. I started writing. At first, it was just a list, things I needed to do, steps to take to regain control of my life. Change the locks. Call a lawyer. Separate the bank accounts. Basic practical things. But as I wrote, the list evolved. Find a gym. Quit smoking. Fix the leaky faucet in the upstairs bathroom. Call Sarah. She'll kill me if she hears about this from someone else. The more I wrote, the more it felt like a blueprint for the man I wanted to become. Not the man I had been for Lily, but the man I could be for myself. The next morning, I called a locksmith. By noon, the house was mine again, physically at least. I spent the rest of the day tackling small repairs around the house, things I'd been putting off for years. Each task felt like a small victory, a reminder that I could still build something with my own two hands. I also called Sarah, my younger sister, who lived a few towns over. When I told her what had happened, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "She cheated on you?" Sarah said finally, her voice tight with anger. "Yeah, that." She cut herself off, taking a deep breath. "I'm coming over." "You don't have to." "Ethan, shut up. I'm coming over." Sarah arrived that evening, armed with a casserole and an unshakable determination to fix me. She spent the next few hours cleaning my kitchen, organizing my pantry, and generally acting like a tornado in human form. "You're not going to let this break you," she said firmly as she scrubbed a stubborn stain on the counter. "Not on my watch." I couldn't help but laugh. For the first time in days, the weight in my chest felt a little lighter. The days turned into weeks, and slowly I started to find my footing. I joined a gym and met a trainer who specialized in working with people recovering from injuries. I quit smoking, though not without a few miserable days of withdrawal, and started focusing on eating better. Each step felt small, almost insignificant, but together they added up to something bigger. I still thought about Lily, of course. It was impossible not to. There were moments when I'd catch myself reaching for my phone to text her, only to remember that she wasn't part of my life anymore. But those moments grew fewer and farther between. One night, as I sat on the back porch, looking out at the quiet street, I realized something. I wasn't just surviving. I was starting to live again. The man I had been, the man who had been crushed by Lily's betrayal, was still there. But he was changing, evolving. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had the strength to face it. And that was enough. The first time I saw Lily again, it wasn't planned. It had been about a month since she left, and I was finally settling into some kind of routine. I'd started going to the gym 3 times a week, and though my body protested every step, I was determined to push through. My trainer, Jake, was relentless but encouraging. He didn't let me quit, even on the days when I felt like I couldn't take another step. "You're stronger than you think, Ethan," he'd say. I didn't believe him at first, but the way I felt after each session, a little lighter, a little more in control, was proof he might be right. That day, I had just finished my workout and was walking to my car when I saw her. Lily. She was sitting on a bench outside the coffee shop across the street, her phone in her hand, her head down. For a moment, I froze. It was the first time I'd seen her since the night I confronted her about Marcus. She looked different, not in a dramatic way, but in the subtle slump of her shoulders, the way she absently twirled a strand of hair around her finger. I debated crossing the street, but something held me back. What was I supposed to say? "Hi, how's life since you tore mine apart?" Instead, I watched as she stood, tucked her phone in her bag, and walked away. It struck me then how small she looked, how far away from the woman I had once loved with everything I had. That evening, as I sat on the porch with a glass of iced tea, Sarah called. "So, are you coming to Ellie's recital this weekend?" she asked. Ellie was her youngest, my niece, and possibly the only child on earth who could make a violin recital sound exciting. "Of course," I said. "Wouldn't miss it." "Good." "Oh, and I signed you up for something." I frowned, swirling the ice in my glass. "What did you do, Sarah?" "Don't freak out, okay? It's a local meetup group. They do everything from hiking to cooking classes. It's not dating or anything like that, just people. You need people, Ethan." "Sarah, I don't." "Stop," she interrupted. "Just try it. You've been making so much progress, but you can't rebuild your whole life alone. Promise me you'll go." I sighed, leaning back in my chair. "Fine, but only once." "Good. Love you. See you at the recital." The meetup was the following week, a group hike through a nearby nature reserve. I hadn't been hiking in years, long enough that my boots were buried somewhere in the back of my closet. When I arrived, a dozen people were already gathered near the trailhead. They were a mix of ages, some chatting animatedly, others looking as uncertain as I felt. A tall man with a clipboard introduced himself as Tom, the organizer, and welcomed everyone with an enthusiasm I envied. As the hike began, I found myself walking next to a woman named Claire. She was around my age, with dark curly hair and a quick wit that made the miles pass faster than I expected. "So, what brings you here?" she asked, sidestepping a fallen branch. "Honestly, my sister. She thinks I need to get out more." Claire laughed. "Somos familiar. My brother did the same thing after my divorce. Said I was becoming a hermit." "Ik glinste hier." Surprised. "Divorce?" "Yep. 2 years ago. Not my proudest chapter, but it taught me a lot." She paused, her expression softening. "You." I hesitated, the weight of the truth pressing against my chest. "Something like that." She nodded, as if she understood more than I was saying. "Well, you've already made it this far. That's something." The hike ended at a scenic overlook, the kind of view that makes you feel small in the best way. As we stood there, taking in the sight of the valley below, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Not hope for Lily or for the life we'd shared, but hope for myself. for the future. That night, I called Jamie. "How was it?" he asked, skipping the pleasantries. "Better than I thought," I admitted. "Good? You're making progress, man. Keep going." In the weeks that followed, I found myself slowly stepping back into the world. I went to Ellie's recital, where she beamed at me from the stage like I'd just handed her a gold medal. I joined another meetup, this time a cooking class where I learned how to make pasta from scratch. Each small step felt like a victory, a piece of myself coming back into focus. And then, one evening, as I was heading to my car after work, I got a text. "Unknown number. Ethan, it's Lily. Can we talk?" I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. For a long moment, I didn't move. Then, slowly, I typed out a response. "Ethan, I don't think that's a good idea. Take care, Lily." And with that, I deleted her number. For the first time in months, I felt free. Free from the weight of her betrayal. Free from the questions that had haunted me. My life wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was mine again. The morning after I deleted Lily's number, I woke up to something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. The heavy knot in my chest was loosening, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I was looking forward to the day ahead. I threw on a pair of running shoes, laced them up tightly, and decided to see how far I could go. The old Ethan would have rolled his eyes at the idea of running for fun, but this new version of me, a work in progress, wasn't afraid to push himself. The first few blocks were rough, my legs protesting every step, but as I found my rhythm, a strange clarity washed over me. I wasn't running away from my problems anymore. I was running towards something better. Later that week, I stopped by the diner where Henry and I had met before. He'd texted me to say he wanted an update, and I figured I owed him one. When I walked in, Henry was already there, sipping his coffee and scribbling something in a notepad. He looked up when I approached, smiling as he gestured for me to sit. "Well, look who's back," he said, closing his notebook. "You're looking better, Ethan." "I feel better," I admitted, sliding into the booth. We talked for a while about everything, my hikes, the cooking classes, even my run that morning. Henry listened intently, nodding along like a proud teacher. "You've come a long way," he said when I finished. "But don't get comfortable. Growth isn't a destination, it's a journey." I smirked, raising an eyebrow. "You always this philosophical?" "Only when it works," he said with a grin. That weekend, I joined another meetup group, this time for kayaking on the river. The group was smaller than the hiking crew, but just as welcoming. Among them was Claire, the woman I'd met on the trail a few weeks earlier. "Hey, stranger," she said as I walked up, her grin as warm as the sun overhead. "Claire," I said, surprised but genuinely happy to see her. "Didn't know you were into kayaking." "There's a lot you don't know about me," she teased, handing me a paddle. The next few hours were a blur of laughter, splashing water, and the kind of easy conversation I hadn't had in years. By the time we reached the riverbank, my arms were sore, but my heart felt lighter. As we packed up, Claire glanced over at me. "There's a bonfire next weekend. Same group. You coming?" I hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Wouldn't miss it. In the days that followed, I found myself thinking about Claire more often than I expected. There was something about her, a quiet strength, a humor that felt effortless, that made me curious. It wasn't love, at least not yet, but it was something. By the time the weekend rolled around, I felt like I was settling into a new rhythm. The bonfire was set in a clearing near the lake. A mix of familiar faces and new ones gathered around a crackling fire. Claire was there, of course, sitting on a log and strumming an old guitar. When she saw me, she waved me over, patting the spot next to her. "Didn't think you'd make it," she said as I sat down. "Figured I'd surprise you," I replied, smiling. The night passed easily, filled with stories, songs, and the warm glow of the fire. For the first time in months, I felt like I belonged somewhere. As the group started to thin out, Claire nudged me with her elbow. "Walk with me?" We strolled along the edge of the lake, the cool night air brushing against my skin. For a while, neither of us spoke, just enjoying the quiet. Finally, Claire broke the silence. "You seem lighter, happier." "I think I am," I said, surprising myself with the honesty of my words. She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It's good to see. You deserve it, Ethan." For the first time in what felt like forever, I believed her. In the weeks that followed, Claire and I started spending more time together. It wasn't serious, not yet, but it was something good, something that felt like a step in the right direction. I still thought about Lily sometimes. There were moments when her name would pop into my head, or I'd hear a song that reminded me of her. But the sting of those memories was fading, replaced by the quiet satisfaction of knowing I was moving forward. One afternoon, I found myself back at the gym, hitting the punching bag with more energy than I knew I had. Jake, my trainer, watched from the sidelines, nodding in approval. "You're a different man than the one who walked in here a month ago," he said as I wiped the sweat from my face. "Feels like it," I replied, grinning. He clapped me on the shoulder. "Keep it up, Ethan. You're on the right track." It was a crisp fall morning when the pass came knocking, literally. I had just stepped out onto the porch with my coffee when I saw Lily's car pulling into the driveway. The sight of it made my stomach twist, though not with anger or sadness this time. It was more like a distant echo of something I used to feel, a shadow of the pain that had once consumed me. She stepped out hesitantly, her hair pulled back, her posture uncertain. She looked smaller than I remembered, like she'd been carrying a weight she couldn't put down. "Ethan," she said, her voice tentative. I sipped my coffee, leaning against the porch railing. "Lily, can we talk?" I nodded toward the bench near the garden. "I'm listening." She sat down, fidgeting with her hands. "I've been thinking a lot about everything, about what I did to us." I stayed silent, letting her find her words. "I was selfish," she continued, her voice breaking. "I let myself get swept up in something that didn't matter, and I hurt you in ways I can't take back. I was wrong, Ethan. I see that now." Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of everything we'd been through. "I didn't come here to ask for forgiveness," she added quickly. "I know I don't deserve it. I needed to say it, to tell you that I'm sorry." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. The old Ethan would have clung to those words, hoping for a chance to rebuild what we'd lost. But I wasn't that man anymore. "Thank you," I said finally. "I appreciate you saying that." She looked up at me, her eyes searching my face. "I hope you're doing okay. I heard you've been changing things." I nodded, a small smile tugging at my lips. "I have. I had to." She swallowed hard, her gaze dropping to her hands. "I'm glad. You deserve to be happy, Ethan." "So do you," I said, meaning it. Lily stood, brushing her hands against her jeans. "I won't take up more of your time. I needed to say it." I walked her back to her car, watching as she drove away. For the first time, I didn't feel the sting of her leaving. I felt closure. That evening, I met Claire for dinner at a small cafe in town. She greeted me with her usual warm smile, her eyes lighting up when she saw me. "Hey," she said, sliding into the booth across from me. "You look good. What's the occasion?" "Just had a long overdue conversation with someone," I said, glancing out the window. "Good conversation or bad?" "Good," I replied, surprising myself with how true it felt. Claire didn't press, and I was grateful for it. She had a way of understanding without needing every detail, a quiet patience that felt like a balm to the scars I was still healing. We spent the evening talking about everything and nothing. Her latest project at work, a disastrous pie-making attempt she'd recently endured, my growing collection of cooking skills. By the time the check came, I realized something. I was happy. Not the fleeting kind of happy that comes and goes, but the deep, steady kind that feels like a foundation under your feet. As the weeks turned into months, life continued to unfold in unexpected ways. I stayed consistent with the gym, trading small talk with Jake for friendly banter. I joined more meetups, trying everything from photography classes to volunteering at a local shelter. Through it all, Claire became a steady presence in my life. We weren't rushing into anything. Both of us carried enough baggage to know the value of taking things slow. But we were building something real, something solid. One evening, as we sat on my porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Claire turned to me, her expression thoughtful. "You're different than when I first met you," she said softly. I smiled, nodding. "I feel different." She reached for my hand, her touch warm and grounding. "Whatever happens, just know you've come so far, Ethan. And you're not alone anymore." By the time the first snow fell, I felt like I had reclaimed my life. The man I saw in the mirror wasn't defined by betrayal or heartbreak anymore. He was someone who had faced the worst and come out stronger, someone who had found a way to rebuild not just his life, but himself. Lily's chapter in my story had ended, but it hadn't defined the rest of the book. As I watched the snowflakes drift down that evening, I thought about everything it had taken to get here. The pain, the struggle, the moments when I thought I couldn't keep going. But I had. And now, standing on the edge of this new chapter, I felt ready to see where it would lead. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just surviving. I was living,